Hi. So, here's the story. Um, okay. Obviously, being a Leo, I don't believe in astrology or anything along those lines. Um, and even though I was born on the 15th of August 1969, which is the first day of Woodstock, at 6:30 in the morning, that's meaningless as well. So what if it was the dawn of the age of Aquarius? And they were dancing around the age of the New Enlightenment, and they got me. Also happened to be 200 years to the hour, apparently, after Napoleon. So, not only am I a Leo, I'm a double Leo. And I also happen to share all the characteristics, or a lot of the characteristics of a Leo. Vainglorious, egotistical, desperate to be the centre of attention, always likes performing on front of stage. But all that's entirely coincidental. And again, as I said, like all Leos, I don't actually believe in astrology. But, saying that, I am an absolute confirmed and committed rationalist. I believe the scientific method has been an absolute triumph in pulling humankind out of the mire. But I also believe in maybe logic, and that we don't live in a binary universe anymore. And quantum theory all showed that the world was no longer a case of yes or no, black or white, but it was a continuum of probabilities. And there are things there where it's just random, complete and absolute random luck. And a case in point in this is I used to work at one of many jobs, but the job I was doing, working for a homeless charity, involved me being in the West End. And I once finished a meeting about 4:30, and it wasn't worth me going back to the office, and I love books, and so I cut through the British Museum, which was a favourite because it's interesting, and there's a bookshop quite close to it called Atlantis Books. Not something I'd normally be hugely drawn to, but a bookshop specifically dedicated to the arcane, the occult, spirituality, pseudosciences and all the fringe things along there. So I was randomly in this bookshop, and it's been there for a very long time. You'll please know it was the regular haunt, excuse the pun, of Aleister Crowley, no less, or Aleister Crowley. Crowley as in holy, yes. So it's Aleister Crowley. So anyhow, I'm in this bookshop, and I cannot stress this enough. Virtually at random, I pulled the book off a shelf. It didn't particularly draw my eye. It was just I was going through a long line of books about just magic, whatever way you prefer. And I pulled this book off the shelf. And it was this. The Private Diary of Dr John Dee. If you don't know about John Dee, fascinating individual. Not only the strange spoke to angels, invented inoculum magic, but was a grand vizier to Elizabeth I, the first person to think about Britain having an empire. He was maps, he was an incredibly well-respected mathematician, but an advisor to the Queen. And look him up, Wiki Dr John Dee. So I pulled this up, and this was found many years after his death, and obviously he had to he had to do lots of his writing in code, etc. But this was found, and this is a book which was republished many years after his death, and then it was reprinted. So I pulled this book completely at random. I knew very little about John Dee, and I opened the page at this page, and it turns out that the first page I turned to was page 3. And in this entry of Dr John Dee's diary, it says, May the 2nd, I understood of one Vincent Murphin, his abominable misusing me behind my back. So this struck me because I do know that the name Vincent Murphy wasn't particularly, well, it happens to be my name, sorry if you don't know that. So anyhow, here it is, just in case you can't see, I mean hopefully this will come out, I'll send up a page of it, or take a photograph of it. So, Vincent Murphy. And then he's mentioned again that this Vincent Murphy, who is a cozener, I think he refers to him. There we go. So he took, basically Vincent Murphy accused him of being a wizard, of being involved in witchcraft, and John Dee took a great affront at this, and so on September the 14th I began against Vincent Murphy, and he changes my name every single time. Wrote to the Bishop of London my declaration against Vincent Murphy put into the court of Guildhall, and this was just as the Queen came to see him that week with her screen glass, to see his screen thing. I'll tell you all about that in a minute. So anyhow, he was awarded £100 damages against Vincent Murphy on October the 20th. Now £100, 600-700 years ago, was this is 1581. It was a sum of unbelievable. There is no way Vincent Murphy turns out to be a cook at one of the palaces. Anyhow, and he was thrown in prison for not being able to pay this. And that was also he put in a sketch of a blazing star, which turned out to be Halley's Comet, one of the first recorded instances of it, in the margin of his work. So poor old Vincent Murphy accused him of being involved in witchcraft, and Dr John said, no, I'm not involved in witchcraft whatsoever. And so poor old Vincent Murphy ended up being £100, couldn't pay it, and was thrown in jail. So strangely, finding my name, and obviously I'm not related to this character or anything, but I did think it was quite rich that Vincent Murphy, who basically John Dee is now, if you want any genuine figure of the occult, forget all the books, forget all the 666, etc. If you want a practitioner, a man who brought out Enochian and Aleister Crowley, was incredibly into the Enochian magic, etc. And that John Dee is probably the closest in terms of the Rosicrucian Enlightenment. If you're interested, I'd look up. These are John Dee's magical tables. But anybody who's knows about the esoteric world will put John Dee as being an incredibly central part of that. But also that the man was steeped in mysticism. And so I find it quite harsh that poor old Vincent Murphy pointed this out, and then ended up getting libelled and thrown in prison for it. But then curiously, that I happened to be in this esoteric shop, I pulled out this book entirely at random and found my namesake having exactly the same scepticism as I had, but curiously, whether that's entirely just a matter of fluke, of course it is. It's also, strangely enough, that the shop happens to be on the Atlantis bookshop, which, as I said, it subsequently is Aleister Crowley's, where he used to buy all his books, Magic, the Great Beast, the Wickedest Man in the World. But this is also the area where it's Russell Square, which is where my other favourite, Bertrand Russell, which is interesting because Bertrand Russell and Aleister Crowley probably sum up the last sort of gentlemen of the British Empire, really, the two extremes of it, the arch rationalist and the arch esoteric. There are more things in heaven and hell than known in your philosophy. So I went on to write, and I haven't published it yet, so don't nick this idea. But it was they were both roughly quite old at around about the same time, and I had an idea of having the two of them meeting, which I don't think they ever did in real life. But the arch rationalist and the arch mysticist meeting during the Blitz in the Second World War, because they were both in London for a little time, and that they took shelter in the British Museum. And I called it When Bertie Met Ali, which I thought would be fantastic. But anyhow, the reason I've talked about this is I was watching a film last night by Orson Welles, another great hero of mine, and part of the film was filmed inside the British Museum. And there is in British Museum exactly, he was sitting, the character playing the main character in this Orson Welles film, was sitting in part of the exhibits at the British Museum. It was mocked up to look like the 1930s. And he was right next to a cabinet, and in that cabinet, it's still there, if you ever get to London, if you get a chance, go to the British Museum, look up the cabinet, which has Dr John Dee's screeing stone and his esoteric tables there. And his screeing stone, turns out it was an Aztec mirror, made of black obsidian, still there on display. Probably the most, technically, I would say, one of the most genuine occult objects in the world. But it's recorded in this diary in between while he was suing my namesake, Vincent Murphy, that Queen Elizabeth came to have a look at it, and basically it's a black obsidian mirror that he used to see ghosts and used to communicate with angels in. But it's still there on display in the British Museum, and it just happened to be in that film I was watching last night of Orson Welles. So, lots and lots of coincidences, but none of them refute science, do they? I mean, it's just fluke, it's just sheer coincidence, don't you think?